Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa. And I'm really looking forward to take two of Firecracker AQUINO, whatever, whatever we're calling him today, because I tell you, sparks are flying all over the globe right now. So I'm wondering what the synergy with that is. Anyway, I know, so for those of you who haven't managed to watch the first show yet. In fact, this is kind of phase 3 already, or chapter
Yeah,
3, if you will,
yeah.
part 3 of our show with AQUINO. We, of course, as we usually do, we talk about other lovely things in between as well. And one of the lovely things we have been talking about as well, and for those of you who watched the earlier show, is we are raising support funds, donations for our veterans. And as we do on our show with Jessie, who's as I'm sure all of you guys know, is a staunch supporter of the veterans. And we have a very special veteran that we support on this channel as well. And I really want to say that, honestly, it's the people very often behind the scenes that give the most incredible information as well. So he's very much a supporter of this channel. So if there's anyone who would be as kind enough, if you have anything extra that you can donate, he is in need right now. So we would really appreciate it. We've already raised $222, right, for him on our previous show. Jessie has matched that. We are matching that too. So if there's anyone who would like to play along, I want to say play along, because it really is fun to support someone and see how we can assist them. That's what I think anyway.
And maybe
So
this
more,
show,
yeah,
we can get one or two people who are willing to match whatever we raise on this show.
that'll be incredible. That'll be absolutely incredible. Now I want to just repeat what you said earlier in the show earlier, Jess. It's like to take just that little bit of stress off, especially the veterans who've been, they're so highly amped. The PTSD is often so extreme that any little thing causes a massive catastrophic mental event very often, which of course we know will then very often manifest into the physical reality as well. So the minute, the more we can just take stress off someone's plate, and as long as it's not causing you stress, that's important to realize as well. Your donations and your support will be highly appreciated. And then, Morna, if you don't mind, you can just post the link to our coffee link there, so to buy us a coffee, or my PayPal, and just to write a little note, veteran support or whatever it is, just so. And I mean, I will, whatever comes in the next couple of days, I'll automatically pass on over to him. So I want to just say thank you so much to everyone who is supporting and just forms this wonderful community, family of caring, because I know a lot of us in these communities and these things that we support and have this understanding and belief feel very isolated. So it's really good to be able to get together and just support each other. So thank you so much. And now, Jess, over to you.
Yes. Well, we've been talking about Michael Aquino's, so far, his book, Fire Force, the Star Wars parody. And, as we go through this, we're really going to realize that a lot of the stuff he put in his book deals with real life things. I would like to start, today we're going to kind of go through defining some of the terms, break down, when he uses a certain term, what is he really talking about? What location? Maybe there's real people he was talking about too, and he literally outlines their names. On page 17, Aquino says, I, Aquino, a historian of events, imaginational. He regarded individual he called 4E as a friend and sent him a copy saying, I recognize that I'm not a professional writer. You should look upon this as no more and no less than fan fiction of the type that frequently appears in Star Trek, Peri Ramadan, and the Dark Shadows fanzines. But never or less, I thought you might derive some fleeting entertainment from my little offering. Um, what was he really saying? You know, well, let's go to another quote here at the very end. Let me see if I can find it here. AQUINO says on page 19, "For I did not author these things, rather I observed the events taking place and recorded what I saw. Similarly, I did not create the characters. As each of them entered into the story, I merely watched what he or she did in various situations and then recorded those actions. As I spent more and more time with the characters, I grew to know them very well, and today count several of them as close acquaintances." So think
Wow.
about that. This is Michael Aquino. I propose that the characters were children and individuals who are and were in the military programs, especially the Star Wars Now projects, um, and that these are based off of real people, real events, real places. Chantelle, as we get in, I don't know if we'll get to it today, but Kino even explains how to open or how to access these bases through spiritual gates in there. He gives the codes, everything, which gets pretty exciting to know which bases and how you access or their spiritual dimensional location. Um,
Wow.
so it gets pretty interesting,
I
all
want,
of
I want
this.
to ask you something there, just on that note. When someone is trained or able to open these spiritual gates, right? Are they using their own God given energy, like their own natural abilities, or are they supercharged with something else?
I would propose that it's actually neither. The
Okay.
key is that, we have to remember that we live in a physical and a spiritual world. Both exist simultaneously. So it's really not a matter of gifts, abilities, or doors necessarily. Those are things that are made to help because, especially with the spirit world, we most of us are very tangible. But once you realize that none of those things matter, that it's just a matter of a destination, you
Yeah.
just step from one place to the other. There isn't anything special you have to do. There isn't even necessarily, you know, special words or, I mean, scripture says that you enter his courts with thanksgiving in your heart. And Thanksgiving is not necessarily certain words that you say. It's a state of being. When you're thankful,
Indeed.
you enter in. And that's how it is with the spiritual gates. You
If it's
when you're in that
done,
position, go ahead.
if it's done negatively, like if it's done not from a place of gratitude or God's will, right? If it's something that is forced, for example, they know where it is, they've got the key, they've got to charge themselves up to get through there, type thing. Do you know what I'm saying? So, are there those situations where they need to be um, externally driven, a force from an external, something from an external force given to them in order to be able to open those gates, travel through them, and do whatever it is that they need to do?
Well, we've talked about how they, that if they can't replicate a true heart of thanksgiving towards God, they'll engage in sex magic to uh, get to the vibration of ecstasy, which is the closest to Thanksgiving.
Got it.
But even
Okay.
in that, you ask why you can't do that on your own. Um, you know, so, that's part of why they use children, but the natural outcome of that ecstasy is still coming to that position of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Get it. I get it. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's not really the intention that drives it. It's the feeling that is accessed. Doesn't matter how they access that feeling, they're able to get there. Right?
Right. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's why it doesn't matter if you're a good or an evil person, so to speak, right? You can get through there by accessing, let's call it bliss, right? What would that, or
Right.
ecstasy, as you said, bliss or ecstasy.
Or
So
even,
they would,
I mean, even at the extreme negative of that, when there's extreme torture and,
yeah,
pain and suffering, you get to that moment when all of a sudden the pain and suffering stops. And what's that natural outcome is that feeling of thank God it stopped. And so even that way they can get to it that way.
absolutely get it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in this book, there's a lot of the connection with music. He outlines some of the tracks and other things that he's used, which becomes vital to understanding really what's behind this book. Is that he's talking about the spirit world, the different dimensional accesses to it, and exactly how they're operating and functioning in that. So he brings out a lot about the Flight of the Valkyrie, which was written by Richard Wagner, one of my ancestors. And for those who don't know, Richard Wagner was the individual, a famous musician um, who was connected to King Ludwig in the earlier centuries when he built the castle Neuschwanstein. And that song, Flight of the Valkyrie, became one of the major songs that the occult uses because, according to the tunes, the tones, it is tuned to the major spiritual gates, the major seven that the military uses. So, Flight of the Valkyrie then um, was Adolf Hitler's favorite song. It became the backdrop music for the Star Wars trilogies. At the beginning when you see all the rolling text and scrolls, you get the da 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 da, da. It goes on and on.
Indeed.
So he says here, page 389, he has a little segment about the music, and he says, in order to help me catch the mood, not just the action and the dialogue of a particular episode, I often choose an appropriate background of music. So, this is key to what we were even just saying. Like, how do they get into that position? Each of the gates is tuned to different songs. Um, you can have multiple songs that are tuned, but we've talked about in some of the shows we did about the Gateway Project how they try to figure out how as a child, what is your soul resonance? What octaves does your soul resonate at? It's the same thing with these gates. They resonate at certain octaves. Therefore, music is something that will help to open them. So in here, what is he saying? That, he would listen to music to get into the mood to go into that spiritual world. He would access through music.
Mm.
There's a lot of artists that are current that create music that allows you to access certain dimensions. It's not just that they do drugs and psychedelically have this vision or this dream. No, they really access these spiritual dimensions through music.
Wow.
Um, so he says that, there were several soundtracks um, that were the keys to these backdrops, which is interesting when you think about that. If Flight of the Valkyrie is one of those songs that can take somebody into a spiritual dimension, um, what happens every time these survivors who are trained in these experiments and projects listen or watch Star Wars? They re-experience, they're brought into that spiritual space where things they're experiencing things in the spirit world. Um, so he says, unfortunately, for many of these, uh, they're they were not like recorded, so he wasn't listening to the CDs. He was listening to the vinyl phonograph records of these songs as he was um, writing up this material into here. And he says, John Williams' original soundtrack score for Star Wars was nothing short of Wagnerian um, in its romantic elegance. So he's admitting that they used Richard Wagner's work, Flight of the Valkyrie, um, for the Star Wars main theme song. Um, so that gets really interesting. Um, in this book, you've got two major military bases that he's basically sharing events that happened at. You do have a couple of the others that are pulled in throughout the work. But when he uses the term fire force, literally he's talking about the Chicago Underground Military Base. It extends pretty vastly. It does include the area where the World Trade Center and the massive World Trade Center fire took place. Um, when he's talking about Star Wars, he is referring to the military programs. And when he talks about the Lost Ark, he's specifically referring to NORAD military program that's based out of the Colorado base in the Cheyenne Mountains. And that also, there were certain portions of that base. You have the physical base, which is NORAD, and that extends 80 floors into the ground. That entire base itself is considered an arc. That's important. They call it the arc, um, which implies that that base is not just a structured building. We've seen the massive military islands that float in the sky. I propose that that arc is a spaceship and that they have built 80 stories deep, sitting in that mountain. That's where they've got it docked. They have two other bases that are like that that I witnessed while I was there, which were the military floating islands. Um, and one was called Uranus. So that's the other one. They go off of kind of they're considered subderivatives of Atlanta or Urlantia, which is under the ocean off of California. So, um, thinking through this, these really are Luciferian Brotherhood individuals. Where do all their names derive from? A lot of it comes from the Canaanite Babylon culture. Scripture tells us that when God called Father Abraham out of the Canaanite lands, that land was called Ur, U-R. So a lot of their terms will go back to that original name for Babylon and the Canaanite lands.
Wow. I would just like to ask you, what exactly is a military floating island?
It is basically a whole island, they can be large. The one that just a few months back that was over Florida was about the size of 3 tri-cities. So they literally have bases that are in the air, basically spaceships. It would be another term if that helps people visualize, but you have cities that are floating in the air.
What?
You have the same
What?
thing with water, where they have, massive yachts that are the size of islands that are floating in the water as well.
So what type of activities go on there? I mean, is it training? Is it this kind of off-earthly stuff that they do, or in-earthly stuff, whatever
All
it
the
is?
above, yeah. I mean, you get the training wherever you have the training, the experiments, the projects. You're also going to have the crimes that have been committed against children, the rape, the torture, the satanic ritual murder, the cannibalism, the adrenochrome. So all of that's going to be included in that.
So what happens? No, I think I've just, these 80 stories deep of the spaceship. Again, I mean, I want to say, is that the same sort of activity that we were just talking about that goes on in each of these? I guess they would divide up the horrors into different
You've got
departments or
different
floors.
worlds, and with that, it's not everything or every aspect of it is evil. We have to remember at the end of the day who's in charge of those things. It's the light side of the system. But you're always going to have that equilibrium, and I guess I'm not going to get too far into that today, but we're not saying everybody is evil or participates in the depth of that
Yeah.
evil. You've got those who cover up, and sometimes that cover up means they don't want to know. It means that they aren't even going to look to see if it's there, that, they're really blind to the evil that's going on, and that's part of the cover up too.
So it's great for them just to have innocent people, because that's really what it is at the end of the day. Not everyone is ignorant. People are just
Right.
innocent a lot of the time. They're really, and these guys know exactly who the innocents are, right? So they're
Right.
gonna cash in on them and not necessarily pay them money or anything, but just know that that's the perfect place for them to keep that cover, because they're so innocent a lot of the time.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
So interesting.
Very.
So, in the beginning of this book, Aquino goes through the history of Fire Force. So, what's he really talking about? The history of the Chicago underground military base. And he highlights, the most intriguing character in the whole Star Wars trilogy, Darth Vader. And so he begins to bring out Darth Vader as this major character. So think about this. You know, where was Darth Vader majority of the time? You know, this is a real individual he's speaking about. He was at Chicago Military Base. And he says that Vader is defined as a magician, with the purpose or with a purpose entirely beyond mere power politics. He gave the conflict one of the two rules of the Sith, you know, is the conflict a transcendential importance. It was not a war between a social establishment and a guerrilla movement. It was a contest between the forms of what humans vaguely sense as good and evil. So, what does he mean by magician? All throughout his career, Aquino defines magic in two ways. And in the system, the two ways are spelled differently. You have magic, which is spelled with a C, which is like your parlor tricks. It's where they can, kind of hold up their hand and they can make flowers poof out, or, it's a sleight of an eye, the illusion or a deception.
Yeah.
That's the first kind. That's magic with a C. But then you have magic that's spelt with a K, and that gets into, you know, true magic where individuals are able to, um, bend what the way they would put it, bend the force, or, maneuver things in the spirit world where what they're willing in the spirit manifests physically. Um, So that's what they're considering. But he says, that this Darth Vader character was a magician with a purpose entirely beyond mere power and politics. So he wasn't in it for power. He wasn't in it to, be a political leader, somebody who is governing or ruling the world. That was not the purpose. Um, you know, this individual gave conflict to the transcendental importance. What is that transcendental importance? The Brotherhood believe that they are gods, that they are coming to that place of enlightenment. Their goal is to enlighten to the point where they themselves are gods. And that's really the war that they're in. It's not a guerrilla movement, it's not to establish a certain social context or order. And in that, you know, it's so true when he says it was a contest between the forms of what humans vaguely sense as good and evil. And they begin to define those terms. The first thing, he wants you to see is that this Darth Vader was not necessarily a villain. Um, that he was merely somebody that was trying to, um, in the midst of that contest between good and evil. So he says the good or the light side, which he defines in the book, he starts to bring out and define characters. So, excuse me 1 minute. So in the book, you have Darth Vader who's connected to the dark side. I would say yes, this individual, Darth Vader, was dark side. He was part of the Order of the Phoenix as well as the Order of Melchizedek. So the character he has representing the good or the light side was Princess Leia. So think about that. They've got a female heading up the light side, and you have the rebels who are with her. So those that aligned with Leia are considered the rebel army. So you have two different militaries now. You've got Darth Vader with his military, sovereign military, and you have Leia with her sovereign military. And that both had their own form of government. Um, that he brings out. The light side is ruled by a queen. The bad or the dark side, defined by Darth Vader and the Empire, so his army is known as the Empire, were ruled by an emperor. So there was an emperor that was in a ruling position as well. And Aquino writes, the bad side represents authoritarian government and manipulation of the natural environment, division of beings into masterminds and workers, and intolerance of nonconformity. So isn't that true that, the system is always trying to get us to comply, to conform to what they have outlined in their authoritarian government structure? I really get into more of that authoritarian government structure in a lot of my affidavits, as which you can find at timothycharlesholmesett.com, and a lot of the different videos that we've put out about the Brotherhood system. Um, it gets kind of interesting as he begins to really define, because he gets into some of the terms like morals, or themes, and he says the moral or the outcome theme of this war is that Star Wars is seen as the good side, and that the good side should triumph over the bad. And that is and that's its ideology that gave it absolute right to do so above political considerations. So, what is he saying? That they've had this entire war going on. There's been a war going on within our country. These projects and experiments were not just projects and experiments. I mean, literally, there was a war that has been going on in this whole other world that's not political. It's all between the light and the dark. And, you know, and what was the whole purpose of it? The whole purpose was so that the good side should and would triumph over the bad. That's what they wanted to prove, was that good would triumph over the bad. And it's interesting because it's not just real goodness. What are they defining as goodness? It's that form of godliness that's part of sets up the end time apostasies and deceptions. And that's what's going to triumph. So they're proving that, yeah, it's triumphing. Even as we think of things now, we see the Q operations in full force, right? Who's behind those Q operations? All those who were trained by AQUINO in the Star Wars projects, who are Jedi, who are light side of the system, and they're doing exactly what they were trained to do. They're proving that the good is going to triumph over the evil. Um, you know, all working together so that the dark side, the evil, falls.
Explain explain the training of the Jedi, if you can. Like when you say that, when we're looking at Star Wars and we're seeing sort of a replication here, and they always, if we just look back, they've been doing this since forever. However, so when you talk about the Jedi of the system, who would these people be? Is there one or two names? I mean, what is the positions they would hold? I would imagine they would be seen as do-gooders, quite honorable,
But
fighting a
we're going to
worthy
get into
cause.
that. He names some. So let me
Okay.
see if I can, without losing my place. When
No,
he
well, then we'll get
starts,
there when we get there. All good. Sorry, I didn't want to
he,
jump the
yeah,
gun.
I mean, he brings out some of the characters. You have Krell Atlin, who is his wife, Lilith, also known as the Lady of Life. I can confirm that, yes, she was participating in those projects and experiments. You actually have the Great George, which is George Lucas. You have others who actually were at some of the bases. You have, let's see where his one name is. Forgive me as I scroll. It was Sutter, but we'll get to the point where I say what name he uses for him in here, but it was General Sutter. You have other generals that, I think he has in here, but doesn't give their names. Some of those are individuals who are in my affidavits. You had Strublbein, you had General Val, you had, um, others who were in there. So some were seen as light side, others as dark side. So he begins to bring out, you even have one of his main characters is based off of the princess um, of Oz, which we've talked about is the Pentagon.
Oh, yes.
So I don't want to get too far because we're, as we get into this, You know, so
What,
it gets
what?
interesting because
Sorry, I have one more thing, and it's just come up, and I was going to ask it anyway. Why are the Star Wars movies backwards? Like one, when I think there's four, right? Four in the trilogy or trilogy, listen to me,
I think
in the
there's
set.
6 altogether, 6.
Are there six? Why do they start with more recent and then they go back, which is unusual because usually it would go the other way around, right? So, is
Right.
there any significance to that? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to check
I
that
think it
out.
was for the development, um,
Okay.
you know, that it yeah, I think it was more for the development that as they were released, basically it's a releasing of information. And, I think that that was part of, I don't want to necessarily use the word trauma, but in that, you develop the characters more and people get hooked because they really like what they see.
Yes.
They're voting at the same time there's a competition. You know, as they're developing the characters, there's real contests, there's real competition. I've brought out in some of my tweets how like really, what was the big world event that just took place in Lisbon, Portugal, for the youth, that pilgrimage, that gathering, those are children that are going to be kind of representing children that are in real contests in these military programs. And they would give us these reps who would pray for us. We wouldn't necessarily know who they were, but we would have children that were praying for us during those times when we were doing intense competitions. And why did they have to pray for us? Because really, it's a life and a death situation. But those, they elevate certain people. They've taken some of that modern day symbology of that has come out in the Hunger Games, where, they publicly in the movies present the characters and people are voting, cheering, deciding what happens for those characters. That's based off real life stuff. That
Wow.
happened with the military, where you would have world leaders, people who would be voting, cheering you on, bidding. They would be putting bets on you. Um, they would win. They would earn money or lose money on you. So you have people that you're competing for in these events, yet you're in a training. Like you don't know, what's really going to happen. You don't know if you're going to live or die. You're stuck with, the basics of the training that you have and pulling on whatever you have, whatever alliances you have in these battles to live.
Wow.
But at the end of the day, what are they really doing? You're in a war. They're making you a skilled warrior. You're openly displaying your skills, your abilities, and based on that, you're either excelling or you're not. Um, so this is a pretty vast thing that they have going on.
I'm interested to know with these kids that they've weaponized. So, when they go to these weapons displays, so to speak, is it the kids that are sold or the services of the kids or the
It can be
gifts?
both, depending on which army or military you're aligned with. So, like there's 3 classes, either you're considered a Sith, a Jedi, or a rogue. If you're rogue, you could work for either side and you're paid for hire.
So, what
If
would
you're
make you
Sith,
rogue?
you're under the Sith sovereign military. If you're Jedi, you're under the light side, the Jedi sovereign military.
What would make you rogue? So, how would they define who's rogue? Are those like the real rebels or just people who are more dual or fluid, if you will?
In a way, you you have that choice. You define, but there's
Okay.
consequences if you choose to be rogue. Um, if you're with, let's just say, the Jedi, then you're guaranteed, um, you're guaranteed jobs, you're guaranteed work, you're guaranteed honor that you earn. You're also guaranteed help, uh, with covering up things, or, um,
Hmm.
if you need to escape or hide out, or you're being hunted, you have that help. If you're rogue, you're all out on your own. There's no guarantees. You have to work out deals. If you want to make alliances or enemies, you work everything out yourself. You know.
Wow. Very interesting. Sorry.
And you do have several of these rogue groups. What they've done is, they will band together. So you do have rogues who band together and form their own little groups, and then will support each other and be what they need to be for one another. So um, so
Hmm.
it's interesting. He brings out, you know, that there were several Darth Vaders, which is true. I've brought out four of them so far. In our conversations in the past, we've talked about the four P's: the priest, the prophet, the Pindar, and the phoenix. Each of them were considered a Darth Vader, working with the Empire. Um, so you've had some of those who have sided completely with the light side, but really they were in positions where they were working with both sides. Um, Yep. So let's see. So then he gets into what the Darth Vaders represent. And he said that they represent the principle, the foundational truth or foundation system, the constructs for the intellectual separateness from the inertia of the universe. This enables a body to oppose active agents such as forces and torques. So, what is he basically saying there? What are forces? Forces are physical and spiritual strength or energy. So that's, our natural energy, natural abilities. A torque is a measurement of that force. So, what does the Darth represent? It represents somebody who intellectually, with their mind, can create that inertia using pulling it from the universe, um, to create a force, a physical, output of spiritual strength and energy that can be measured.
Wow.
So that's that in a nutshell. So,
That's
it's in the
actually
mind.
incredible. It's actually incredible because it explains everything. If we really understand the power um, that this world holds and the way that these guys are able to harness it,
Right.
to manipulate and to seduce and whatever the heck else it is. It's so good
Yeah.
to understand these things. I think for me, really, what I find amazing is just it's like opening my eyes, and it's not really having to do anything about this. You know, what we've chosen to do is have a platform, right, and expose with people
Right.
like yourself. So it's just the fact that our eyes are opening and saying, oh my goodness, that's how they did it.
Right.
That's all we really need to know, because that makes us wiser to a whole lot of other deceptions around us, doesn't it?
Right. And so, within that military, you've got, these Darth Vaders who aren't, they're not people who are magicians with a C, where they're creating illusions, or, um, the sleight of eye. They're not masters of magic that way. Really, he's telling you that, this is the upper levels of magic. especially Solomonic, Thelemic, um, Enochian magic, where they're able to, manipulate the energies from the universe, and with their mind, they're able to, physically um, show that energy as a strength, and it's measurable. And that's really where the military came involved with this. Why did they classify, the study of these children and the training of these children under these individuals, um, who could do these things? It's because they wanted a controlled environment where they could define, measure, figure out how do things work, and a platform in order to get paid to do it. They got paid by our government to do these projects and experiments, to do their witchcraft and their sorceries and their divination, and to train children to do it. So keep that in mind, that our government has paid these people to do this.
I want to just say that on that note, and a couple of weeks ago on the Drop In with Arrow, we actually spoke about this new Barbie movie. And in this Barbie, I mean, they've now got Barbie Ouija boards, right? I don't know if you guys knew that, because we actually spoke about
Don't
that.
buy them.
So
Don't buy them.
well, exactly. And it's like in these innocent ways, and that's something I noticed. In these innocent ways, they are now, I mean, training kids, because in the movie, despite what the characters were and what have you, but already they're talking about the traveling between the portals between Earth and Barbie Land. So immediately they're already getting kids to think about jumping out of your sad reality, because from what I saw, Barbie was very sad because her earthly owner was very, very sad. So to get out of your sad reality, you just teleport yourself into Barbie Land, where you're having the school time and whatever it is. But then it's also, most certainly about that. And they talk about in the Ouija board, channel your inner fashionista. So channel the Barbie that's going to give you the best fashion choices of today. I find this astounding, because Barbie has been around since forever. And for me, that is already, along with this military weaponization of kids,
Right.
this too is now getting kids desiring to leave their bodies, literally, or leave their experience or their circumstances and move to a better place, instead of dealing with the fact that, well, mom and dad can't actually afford more clothes. Let me deal with, let me accept what I have. And I'm using this in very sort of simplistic terms here, but this is what's happening all over,
Right.
and in such subtle ways. It's crazy, actually. Wow.
It is how they run things, and they're defining the narrative, and over and over through AQUINO's writings, we see that where you have an individual who is high level in the military who's defining the narrative. Um, what character, what avatar, it gets us into those terms that they used in these projects and experiments, um, to be able to define things that were in the spirit world. And so they're just, desensitizing us to their term and
Absolutely.
terminology. Um, he even
Absolutely.
says here, he's talking about the rebels versus the Darth Vaders and their purposes, their goals. He says the rebels worked towards individualistic goals, which, he defined. So if you think about this, the rebels are the good guys. Okay, they're meant to be seen as the good guys. But what is he proposing here? If they're working towards individualistic goals, what's behind that pride? Who are they elevating? Themselves, only themselves, right? So here is one of the twists, where they're making the villain the good guy. Okay. He says the Darths are those who did not move self or physical reality. So how did the rebels, prosper their individualistic agenda? If they're in a situation, they either have to move themselves or move their physical reality, change their environment. But he didn't do that in the equation. He said the Darths bend the force, uh, the spiritual reality, until it manifests physically. So whatever they wanted to happen, they made happen. They didn't say, well, I can't do that. I have to go another way. Um, they found a way to move reality.
Take shortcuts,
Yep,
right? And
between
and
to work within that physical, spiritual world confines, you know?
wow. And because they could, and because they're so smart with energy, they can. And it's things like when we're looking at things like crystals as well, right? I
Mhm.
mean, they're using things like that to usurp these energies. So it's very clever how they do it and what they've
Right?
taken the natural gifts that God has given us and completely distorted that and corrupted it and
I mean,
degraded it, really.
he tells you exactly how they do it, you know? He says on page 15, the real individualistic was Darth Vader. Okay, so
Yeah,
think about that. He's defining the rebels as the light side of the system. Their agenda is to raise themselves up as gods, right? What does he just admit right here? The real individualistic was Darth
yeah.
Vader, who determined to bend the force to his purposes rather than to disintegrate his will and surrender it to inertia. Conscious distinction from the natural order is a frightening notion to humans, hence they define it as evil and conjure up Satan's to personify it as mythology. But what is he saying? He's saying it's not a myth. That we can step into that place where we have authority to bend the physical and the spiritual realities as we want to bend them. So in that, we get a
This,
few definitions, which we'll get into in a minute here. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm a student in your class right now.
I mean, he's telling you, he's saying, I am a Darth Vader. I have power. I can move and bend the force, which he could. He
Exactly,
could. I witnessed it,
exactly. Wow.
And he
That
didn't
is
even have to do anything to do it. He could think and make stuff happen. That's how they work. Um, So we have the force. What is the force? The force is the reality. You have two realities in that force. You have the physical and the spiritual. So when he uses that term, he's either talking about the physical world or the spiritual. Um, Bending the force, which is basically he's talking about magic with a K. Magic is the ability to cause one's will to manifest in the physical or spiritual. Um, so here's what's interesting. On page 15, he says, but because their minds contain elements of independence, whether they like it or not, they find evil alluring, and so Darth Vader became an anti hero. So he talks about that draw that no matter how much you're trying to just be in that neutral place, that as you are engaging in this magic, um, there's evil, there's good, but what's the more alluring? It's always going to be the evil. Uh, and that's then, in that he's really bringing out about that equilibrium, defining that within the system, there's the two forces, the good, the evil, the male, the female, the light, the dark. Both use magic to bend the force, but the more alluring side is going to be the evil. And, that's part of the delusion of the devil, that he makes one side become more palatable to those who really don't understand either side. And what is the silent control behind these two forces? It's death. Death was always the control, the factor that really controlled both sides. Both are subject to death, and death has a name, and death is an entity. So here you get behind the silent demonic attachments that control survivors, that the system embeds. You will always have the contract that they make between the children in the programs and this being, which is Azrael. He's the angel of death that the Lord sent out in the book of Exodus to take the lives of the firstborn of Egypt when Pharaoh would not let God's people go. So he talks about, that a little bit. Doesn't mention the name, but that's who he's talking about, is Azrael. So how do you get rid of that? Because really that's what controls, is that fear of death. All of us are subjected to that fear of death, and our traumas are those near-death experiences that cause and stir that fear. And scripture tells us, the solution, that anytime there's a demonic, that demonic influence, that we have the authority, because Jesus Christ secured the authority for us to rebuke and to cast out. So we have the authority to rebuke and cast out that fear of death and fear of premature death. Only God has that control of our time. So it's kind of interesting, and scripture talks about that death will be the last enemy defeated. And it says, "O death, where is your sting?" So the Lord will defeat, remove that authority that has temporarily been given to Azrael to take lives.
Wow.
So then he gets in, so this is interesting, because he starts to get into how the competitions, how does this training work in that system? And this is page 15. He says the Darth Vaders can be destroyed, but only by greater Darth Vaders. So he's getting into the witchy battles. I like this part. Darth Vaders can only be destroyed by other Darth Vaders who are greater Darth Vaders, or by accident. Get that. They can be destroyed by accident. Guess what? That happened to a lot.
In the wrong place at the wrong time.
You know what that term accident really means? It means if God intervenes, they have to call the hand of God an accident, right? Because they have no control over it.
I was going to say, like, calling it out as being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Darn it, Lord. Not that one, but, So he breaks down the terms. These are the foundational operational rules of how the force works within these magic battles, competitions, and wars that they simulate. And it also is the key to how does one rise in power. There's 4 ways. Direct challenges. So, let's kind of put this in perspective. So let's say like you're high priest status or high priestess, and you want to elevate to grand high priestess. You have 2 options. Either you wait for the grand high priestess to die, When a grand high priestess dies, so like when Gloria Vanderbilt died, that position is put into an open status, meaning that um, that someone like basically with the open status, you start to put out claims saying, "Hey, I want that position." If nobody challenges you, you automatically get that position. But most of the time, it is going to be challenged because you have a lot of people who want those positions that come with more power and authority. So when Gloria died, there were five high priestesses that all made a claim, which meant then that there was a witchy battle. So then they will go to one of the battle arenas. That one took place at Neuschwanstein, and they will duke it out uh, until one of them wins. So the last one standing is the one who gets the position. Um, we actually had Beyonce was the one who the last two in that battle were Beyonce and Harry's wife Meghan. And that's why at the pronouncing of who won that battle, they had the Lion King, um, you know, grand hoopah. And in there, you see there's videos that went out of Megan coming up to Beyonce and addressing her as my queen. You know, if you thought that was odd, it was because you had basically a ritual thing happening publicly, and we don't get the whole backstory. But they were, you know, in their world, um, that's exactly what was happening. Was Beyonce won the battle? Megan had to suck it up, call her queen, and was not
Ouch.
elevated to grand priestess position,
That must
which
have been
means
a
that
big
she's
ouch.
still under Beyonce. Um, so,
Oh
so
dear.
the first way you can rise in power is the direct challenges. The second is replacing. So, there are times where situations will happen where they will replace people. So we see that sometimes with the doppelgangers, um, where they've got lookalikes. That's the situation with Prince Harry. Um, because of the health of the original Harry, he's not able to act in his capacity or really be in his position the way the system wants him to be. So the little boy that we've grown up calling Harry, he very much is Harry. That's who we have created and made Harry, yet he's not the true Harry, but he's had to live Harry's life. Um, so that's a replacement position.
Is
You
the
also
is the
had
true Harry still alive? Just as a matter of interest, the child
no,
that was
he
born
he
Harry.
did pass away with his health complications. I think it was just 2 years ago in 21. So he
Did
did
we ever
pass
see
away.
him? Did Diana ever present the true Harry to the world, or was it always a
He
little
was
fake Harry?
seen, yeah, there would be periodically there were videos that would go up that showed his face and stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
You also had with replacing, but it wasn't a full replacement. Sometimes you have dual positions where they would use twins, um, but they never bring out the true existence of the second twin. So you have two individuals living one life. So like Queen Elizabeth, you had her, we've talked about her twin sister, Lilibet or Lisbeth. She was that was one of those where you had two people living one life interchangeably. The third way is destroying or by accident. So they can purposely destroy or, murder, take out another person or cause an accident. Um, and then you get the outright overthrows. Um, so those are the 4 ways that you can enter into your positions. And all of these different like ways, what they call these are missions. Isn't that interesting? They call them
Wow.
missions.
Missions. Wow.
So in our US military, I now have a question, are all those things that they consider missions really one of these things? So what's interesting is that in his chapters, as he starts to get into the different events and things that are happening, is that he calls them missions. And so when you start to break them down and really look at them, like as we get into them more as we go through this book, we're going to define, start to define them. What was that mission? Was that mission a direct challenge? Was it a replacement? Was it a mission of destruction causing an accident, or was it an outright overthrow? And who
Wow.
was involved, which bases? So with this, not only who works with the Darth Vaders, you have the bases. Um,
Yeah.
if each of those Darths is assigned to a base, um, what you have then is you've got, these Darths who are overseeing a base, overseeing a military. So what I'm beyond proposing, I'm telling you, is that each of these major 4, you know, how could we describe all these military things through that Rosicrucian layman, which is the key? It's because really it's the brotherhood system that's in charge of our government and our military. So just like, you've got the council, you've got the councilmen. Underneath them are those grand high priests who are going to oversee quadrants, both in the United States as well as internationally. What we're just describing mostly is within the United States, but it applies internationally. So each
Okay.
base has, um, you know, is connected to the Sith as well as the Jedi forces, the Federation Alliance, which is the council, oversees everything. But within those bases, you have a Darth who's assigned. You also have a queen who's assigned to oversee the
Queen
dark and
Leah.
the light side of those bases. And, they're going to, yay or nay missions that are proposed. So that's what we're starting to get into. Do you want to go a little over? Because we can start to break down some of the terms and characters that he's talking about.
Jessie, I'm sure the viewers would absolutely hate that.
If we stopped. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, they'd hate it if you stopped. I think I think I'd be very unpopular. You see,
Right?
captain of my soul, your wish is my command. Of course, we would have gone a little bit further, Jess.
All right, so we're going to keep going. Sometimes you'll see these terms also used in news as they're speaking about events that have taken place. So it's important to pay attention to that. Um, so we talk about, we've got one character he brings out, Krell Atlin, who is his wife Lilith. We've got the Great George, who's George Lucas. He sometimes will talk about his sci-fi friends. That's defined as 30 others who were interested in these projects and experiments and in these sci-fi stories. So there were 30 investors that he was sharing these with. They were buying, selling, and trading them as stories, buying, selling, trading the rights, the stocks to the material that came out of true children's lives as they went through this training. We've got the spiritual world, which he will define as the other world, the galaxy, the alternative universe, or the parallel world. The galaxy also is used in reference to spiritual dimension databases. Um, so galaxy kind of sounds like Starlink, where you've got all these databases that are keeping track of information. You have Star Wars, which was the Chicago-based program. He even tells you he archived it on Glinda. Glinda is his actual computer, which was linked and connected to the Pentagon and Emerald City. So a lot of the data for what happened and transpired in these programs was documented on Glinda and shared with the Pentagon and Emerald City. You have Andromeda, which was the NORAD-based program. That was archived on his computer Kronos. That one was linked to Antarctica, and Antarctica is defined as 3 different military bases. You have the actual Antarctica that's down south, and then you have the one that we would just always call up there. We're going to Antarctica up there. That's the Greenland base, but that one is also connected and has direct access to the Alaska base. Those 3 composed together made up what the Order of Melchizedek, or Initiates of the Flame, define as the mythological city of Ragnarok. So you've got all 3 of those making up Ragnarok. And if anybody doubts the reality of these things, hey, it's all on his computer Kronos. There you go, huh?
Wow.
Which Kronos, why did he do that? What's going to come out is, Kronos really is the demonic spirit in charge of that, protecting that information on that computer. Kronos works with some of the others, Media, Metatron. We see a lot of those names coming out in our society now. Kronos is also connected with the water major principalities. So you're going to have Triton, Poseidon. So Kronos is connected in that class of principality commanders, kind of. So not like a top principality like the major ones I brought out, but he is. So he was in charge of guarding all the information and data for those bases, Antarctica, the Greenland, and the Alaska bases. So Glinda is the name of a witch. We see her introduced through the Wizard of Oz series, connected to the Pentagon and Emerald City. And so you've got a female there who's in charge of guarding all of that information. So he talks about
The Leia, is it the Leia? She would then represent the Leia, so to speak, right? The light side, right?
Nope, different position.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
you've got Glinda, and then you're gonna have the Princess of Oz that we're getting to here in a minute. So all 3 are different individuals or entities.
Okay. Interesting. Wow.
So you have events in the spirit world he calls personal fantasies. So think about that. There's a very specific tweet when Fiona Barnett came out about AQUINO and attacked AQUINO and brought up the reality of these programs, Aquino responds to her by using that term and says it's nothing but, those are nothing but fantasies.
Wow.
What was he
Wow.
really saying? He tells us in this book, what was he really saying? What are events in the spirit world? They called them personal fantasies. Real, documented, measurable accounts in the spirit world that the military measured and documented, they called personal fantasies, so that those who were not part of those programs would think that it's not a reality.
Exactly.
And when she
Wow.
calls him out on it, what a slap in the face. He's saying to her, that was just a fantasy, like he uses those terms. Um, He's literally he admitted in that tweet the reality of those programs. Um, right in front of her face, but the rest of the world discredited her and took it as a bad thing. This happens to survivors all the time as they come forward with that. This is why, why did he publish um, the records in sci-fi magazines and other material and books? It was so that it would have that illusion. That's part of the magic trick, is that if you think, oh, it's just a sci-fi, it's a make-believe, they're just stories, that's how the world's going to see it. It discredits any survivor who tries to come out who says, hey, this actually was real. This happened to me. And, the double slap in the face is that, our stories are made real and published, and yet nobody believes the reality of our experiences because it's been classified as a sci-fi, as something that's make believe. Yet he openly admits that fantasies are events in the spirit world.
Exactly. Wow.
And that,
Gaslighting of the first degree. Wow.
the sliding of the hand, the magic trick, is that not only is magic able to be performed in reality, the bending of the spiritual and the physical world and manipulating things, and they can do it with their mind, yet the bigger magic trick is that they can do it in such a way that the rest of the world thinks that it's just an illusion, that they
Yeah.
doubt the reality of it.
But if you look at also the way he's written his book to describe Darth Vader, right? He makes it very seductive because if we think of human nature, human nature, we're naturally curious, right? We want to explore. We want to, we're curious about things. So if we think about this guy saying, well, you know what, this is what it's about, and this, you're going to go, hang on. And it's going to appeal to some people. But it's
Well,
almost like they, sorry, just almost like they take you to a heightened state of appeal. But as there would be those that would then maybe be drawn in or seduced by that appeal, it's a very different story once you've crossed that line, right?
I mean, and these people, they're people like you or me. Even though they're grotesquely sick and have engaged in sick things, this is what they were brought up for. This was their life, their reality. They
Yeah,
have character, they have humor. I can remember that, when Karkok would come on when we would walk into the facilities, there would be times that Aquino would start doing the Valkyrie song. He'd be like da 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 da. Like every time Karkok was stepping in, he would start the da 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 da, da. Like it was like an accolade for the emperor walking in, right? It's like, but those things are
yeah,
things you hold on to, that you're like, there was a humorous aspect to some of this stuff. You have to look at that, you have to keep that balance, that there are, that's what he brings out in the parodies. he brings out all those little moments that were lifted up, that were humorous, that, you know, when everybody started giggling, the ironies that happen where you're like, "What the heck? We didn't expect that to happen." You know, like, there were goof ups that you're like, you know, I mean, in the moment, you just suddenly you would be like, "Ah, I gotta do this," and everybody's like, "Wait, where did that come from? What the heck?" And then you'd get this result you didn't expect, and everybody's laughing, right? So those are things that he brings out in the parodies, you know, that happened in those events, and you're like, you know, I mean, you'd have stuff where you're like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't expect to live that one, but here we are, we made it," you know, like, "Good move, we made it." Um,
Wow.
so, you know, when you look at it that way, like, you're seeing it as it was in real life, you know, that there were those intense things, but there also were those, you know, funny things too. So one of the
Indeed.
other important terms, he'll use the term prose, as in poetry. When he's using that, basically it's the embedded satanic writings, the grimoires or spells. Um, you know, his all of his books have the embedding. It can be both words or imagery. Let me just show you here one of them. The one he likes to use the most is the same one that he uses on the cover for his Mind Wars series. I just gotta find one here. So in that one, he has it on every chapter. In here, it's just periodically. Now I'm not finding any chapter that has it on there. We shall find one. Um, but it's basically where you've got the W and the M, what looks like a W and an M overlapping,
Yeah.
and that's the symbol right there. That's the symbol for sex magic. So literally, he puts like the the government seal right here. He puts the chapter title or heading date, and then he sealed this chapter with sex magic. So I think that let me propose why I believe he did that. I believe he did that specifically for the chapters, the events that he's relaying that happened in the spirit world where they engaged in sex magic in that event. He may not bring it out in the book, but I think that that's what he's telling people is that, hey, like you need to, when you're reading this, read it like it's, you know, a satanic porn. You know, this was a sex magic event. That's why I think he put that symbol there. Um, was so that those 30 people who were investors, you know, could let their imagination go to the fullest extent in the scene. Um, you know, so he begins to bring out places. As I get more into the book, we'll have more that we're defining here. Some of them he has planet names where it's like planet 1, 2, 3. Um, Planet 3 is actually what he calls um, Holly Weird Carl Orfornia. Let's say that name again, Carl Orfornia. Holly Weird Carl Orfornia. Um, Really, what is that? That's Hollywood, California. But why did he do that? I think that Carl Ofornia is a code name for someone connected to the California area or the California base. Um, let's see, what's the next one we've got here? We've talked about the arc already. We didn't bring it out, I don't think, totally on this show, but the arc when he uses that term, is talking about the massive starship. But then you also have the ark referencing to the Ark of the Covenant out of scripture. When he uses the term experience, that's also another term for a spiritual encounter that one experiences as they read the prose that is embedded with magic. So, why did he embed the magic? It's because you're meant to have a spiritual encounter or experience as you read that section. So, this is beyond holographs or beyond, you know, visually seeing, like, why is that spell embedded there? It's because it's going to pull people into that encounter as they're reading it into an actual sexual experience, which may include demonic spirits. Um, you know, my question is are there women or people who get called up every time somebody read that account? Um, were there beta kitties who were tuned to that spiritual dimension who were called up to engage in that event every time somebody decided to read it? I don't think that's a far-fetched idea. I think that's exactly what's happening with that,
Wow.
which is yet another
Okay.
form of profit, off of this material. The next one he mentions is Krell, which is Mars or Zion or Area 51. That's on page 25. He talks about a civilization of pyramids and crystalline beings who inhabited Altair 4 originally. Altair 4 is there another place that we'll get into later. So I think that's a good spot to stop today. But yeah, it gets, let me, page 18 was an interesting quote where he's talking about his computers. He says, the mathematics, the research, and the writing filled bank after bank of my hardworking polymorphic 8813 computer, Glinda and Chronos. It became such a horrendous mass of data that meeting the anticipated date was impossible. So it means he's weeding through all the data that's on those on his computers in order to put it into written form. Yep. So on page 17, he's also
Wow.
talking about the man with the sci-fi magazines, Ferry Ackerman. He calls him Forey Ackerman. The other Forey Ackerman did enjoy the pseudo-history so much so that he dispatched his copy via time warp spaceogram to our present-day solar system. So Ferry Ackerman became one of the individuals trafficking these stories. So it says Forey dispatched it to Planet 3, Hollyweird, California. So I think that Carl Ofornia, he's making it sound like it's Hollywood, California, which it is, but it's a Carl that's from Hollywood, California area who received that information, said, I read it with great interest and said to myself, why, this is much too unusual an item to simply let languish in limbo like Stuart J. Barnes' Tarzan on Mars. So is Tarzan on Mars really chronicling somebody's experiences at Area 51? He says, so I am presenting it here as a curiosity from which I believe you will derive an exciting reading experience. Bearing in mind that these events do not follow the path of George Lucas's history, nor the late Lee Brackett's, nor any other authorized historians of Star Wars, but are, as he puts it, a personal fantasy of Michael Aquino's. So,
Wow.
if personal fantasy is, the experiences in the spirit world, and he's already defined himself as the authorized historian of these events. He's the person writing the story from actual events, the history of it. He's
Wow.
saying that this is his way he found to write out a history of, top secret, and actually there's a clearance above that. But basically, top secret US information he put out as parodies and, bought,
Wow.
sold, traded, profited off of the children's lives that were being used on these bases. And he's not the only person, so as we get on more, other people are going to come in now into this, so not only were they displaying children as weapons and buying, selling, trading, to other countries or among the countries. So that's the political spectrum of this. You have the governments that were buying, selling, and trading on the children. But then among, those military bases that are doing the training, they had a secondary profiting that, as Michael Aquino, and he states that these were regularly scheduled and published. So him and other generals were in this sci-fi magazine scene making, these stories that then were sold to the public, in the fandom market of sci-fi.
Wow.
You know, so how
This is
many ways
incredible.
are they profiting off of children? It's just sad. So
And it seems to me, when I mean, we what is it, about a month, 6 weeks ago, we were doing the gateway experience with you, right? You were decoding that, and this just seems, I can see how this interfaces with that. So, really to use those kind of techniques or methods, if you will, and
yeah,
especially when they're doing the Jedi training, the whatever other training, I would imagine, the gateway training or experience would interface with that very, very well. Wow, these guys are deceptive. That's
yeah.
really, really deceptive. Wow.
Yeah, it
Very
goes beyond. I mean, they've found ways to even, in that, at the end of the day, we have to remember that they're able to bend, as they put it, bend the force, right? So not only are they doing it in writing, um, the writing and the writing of the prose, the grimoires, the satanic material, then shifted where even, you know, were they able to do it through music as well? Create music that can cause spiritual things to manifest.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, guys. Well, I certainly hope we've all enjoyed today's show. I know I certainly have. Thank you so much, Jessie. And
thank
again, I
you.
want to just say thank you so much to our contributors, to our veteran. Mona, can you show us who's contributed today? Actually, I can see it here.
Well,
Sorry, it's in the
Best Belsi 007. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank
And
you
then there
so
was
much. Yeah. Stacey Jane Platt and Joanne Breeze and Joanne Breeze again.
there
So,
we
guys, I want
go.
to say thank you so, so much
Thank you.
for
Yeah.
those of you who have supported our veterans for today. Really, really a great thing. And if there any of you who missed the beginning of the show, we are supporting veterans. So if there's anyone who can support, donate, even if it's just your prayers for our veterans here. And I want to say, Jessie, thank you so much. Super interesting. I mean, really, really interesting. I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd like to say before you end off for us in prayer again.
Yeah, I encourage people to tune in next week. I think we're scheduled for a double next week as well. We'll get on. We'll be doing the Firecracker 4 and 5. We're going to start to get into more of
Awesome.
defining for you, Shanti, how the spiritual gates were used, and you know, how he's talking about them here, and we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, I know we'll get into talking more about the who they're calling the queen, or the female individual who oversaw Oz, the Pentagon. So we'll get into that individual. So people can start researching, you know, start looking for high-level females who were behind the scenes, kind of overseeing at the Pentagon. You know, we might get into some of those backstories, and they'll get interesting.
Very interesting. My word. Well, tune in again, everybody. Watch this space. And again, thank you so much. Jess, over to you.
All right. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you are doing. We just ask for your grace, your mercy. We thank you that you're supplying the need for this veteran who's in need for the next couple months. We thank you that all the finances will be there, and that you will provide and take care of his needs. We ask for everybody who might be struggling right now, Lord, and we ask that you would just give us that financial relief, that you would open up your storehouses of goodness, that you would supply all of our need, and that you would fulfill your word to us in Psalm 23, where you say that you will lay us beside still waters, and that we shall not want. So I thank you for that, and we just bless your holy name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jess. That was beautiful. Thank you, Monet. Thank you, everybody. It's been really, really wonderful today. So, and yeah, this is almost triple dose Jessie today. Thank you, Jess.
All right. We'll see you guys later.
Yeah, indeed. Take care, everybody. Like, share, subscribe. Everyone needs to know this information, please. Thank you. See you next time. Cherry buys.